Okay, so if everyone could please be seated, I'm going to start with announcements shortly. Okay. Someone also for online? Okay. And sound? I can start? Okay. Good morning again. Nice to see you all. Hopefully rested, got some early morning sunshine, and got to see some lemurs. So that was really exciting. So I'm going to repeat a little bit of what I said yesterday, just in case there are new people joining us online this morning. So good morning to you all, our invited speakers, our attendees, and our, presenters, because there are varied versions of you with the posters, with the talks. So good morning, welcome, welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome you again to the 5th International Meeting on Zoo Research, Conservation, and Biodiversity. We are very happy to have you here, and of course, your presence continues to help us evolve the conference. My name is Azogu-Sepe. I'm the head of the research department here at the Serengeti-Park Hodenhagen. And along with my colleagues, who at the moment I only see Ruth, but there's also Philip and Sergio. Sergio is somewhere, I don't know. But anyway, we are the hosts for this event. So if you need anything, please reach out to us. And then there are some housekeeping rules for presenters. We will let you know if your presentation is going too long by one of us will raise a card from the back. We have time cards, of course, so those will show 5 minutes or 1 minute time frame. For online presenters, please make sure you join the online presentation as speaker. And if you have any questions before your presentation, please send it to me either by email or in the chat. I will be monitoring it. Please, online presenters and online attendees, feel free to engage with us. So by sending in your questions, so we can read it to the presenters after their presentation. We have also a little bit of time frame in between, but we will try not to go overboard so that we can keep the schedule for today. So any questions, please refer them to me by email or in the chat. All right, so with that said, I am happy to introduce our keynote speaker for today. It is Dr. Angela Stuja. She leads the Mammal Communication Group at the Acoustic Research Institute of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Her books, Von Singenden Mäusen und Quietschenden Elefanten, I had to practice this. So it means of singing mice and squeaking elephants. And the other book, Elefanten, ihre Weisheit, ihre Sprache und ihr soziales Miteinander. Elephants, their wisdom, their language, and their social interaction, received Austria's Science Book of the Year Award in 2022 and 2024, respectively. Her keynote address is titled EleCom Towards Encoding Elephants' Vocal Communication Using AI. She will be describing their newly launched project, EleCom, in which she proposes the potential use of artificial intelligence to analyze elephants' vocalizations and communication patterns and generate novel hypotheses about signal functions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Angela Stuja.
Thank you. That's the, okay. Thank you very much for having me. I'm just starting my timer here. Thanks so much for having me and for inviting me. Can you guys hear me? There's some, yeah. And for having me here. I'm really enjoying this conference a lot, and I'm looking forward to our final days. And I'm going to talk about a bit encoding elephant vocal communication using artificial intelligence. EleCom is just the abbreviation that we use at our institute for our project. It's the short term for elecommunication, elephant communication. Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about AI, and I have been asked to do that. But please keep in mind, I'm not a computer scientist. I'm a biologist, and the level of my understanding is very much below kindergarten. So it's very basic. But still, I want to share my experiences with you. So what is machine learning? Machine learning is a method that allows computers to learn from data instead of being explicitly programmed to do so. In other words, rather telling the computer exactly what to do, we give it examples and the computer figures out the rules on its own. A very simple example, banana versus apples. So in traditional programming, you would tell the rules to the computer, like if the object is yellow and curved, it's a banana. And if the object is round and not yellow, for example, it should be classified as an apple. In machine learning, we do it differently. We show the computer a lot of pictures, labeled pictures, tell them that's a banana and that's an apple. And the computer looks at the data, finds the patterns, and learns how to make the decision on its own. And once trained, it can correctly classify even new pictures that the computer has never been experienced or exposed to before. So how does it work? Machine learning uses mathematical models to recognize patterns. And there are different types of learnings that probably many of you have heard about if you are somehow involved in AI methodologies. So the first is supervised learning. That's what I explained before. The computer learns from labeled data. Then there is unsupervised learning, where you basically just provide unlabeled data and the computer should find the patterns and structures on its own. And then there is reinforcement learning, like in animal training, where you implement a feedback system. This can also be a researcher that tells the computer right or wrong. It's the right classification or the wrong classification. Based on this feedback, again, the computer learns. And I probably don't have to convince this audience why AI is important in biological research, just to mention some examples. For pattern recognition and efficient data processing. Nowadays, we are generating a whole lot amount of data using acoustics, videos, GPS, onboard systems on animals. So we are generating a lot of data. And AI can really help us to process and analyze this data. Because for a human researcher, it's just impossible to process all this data. Then for predictive modeling, AI can forecast trends, population trends, movement trends, for example, or if a disease outbreak happens, how is that going to spread within the population? That's what AI can help us to predict. As well as automation of repetitive tasks. We have to do a lot of repetitive tasks as researchers. We have to label and annotate data, and AI can really help us to be more time efficient with these very boring, but still very important processes. And integration across disciplines, for example. If we have a multidisciplinary project and we want to understand pattern or effects of combining data of different disciplines, that can be ecological data compared with movement data, with behavioral data. So there's a lot of different input that for us researchers is really hard to comprehend and to extract. And here, AI can really establish and detect patterns that probably would not have been obvious to us as human researchers. And there are, of course, real-world applications that probably most of you know or even are using some already. So we can use AI in behavioral analysis of animals. We can use it for identification. This can be species identification when we have a lot of pictures from camera traps. And I'm just interested in my specific tiger, and I don't really care about all the deer that is going by. AI can help us with this. Or even identifying individuals. So now there are research projects that try to develop models that can identify elephants based on their ears. Of course, AI can process GPS and movement data to uncover migration routes, corridors, habitat use. And it's also important for bioacoustics. Bioacoustics is a really important tool for conservation and animal welfare. We use it a lot for biodiversity monitoring. So we just place autonomous recording units a lot in different habitats, and again, generating a lot of data that needs to be processed. We need to identify species in all this amount of data, and here AI can be a valuable tool as well. And particularly in bioacoustics, the AI revolution really captured all the bioacousticians. Because of all these powerful human language models, of course, we are really having the hope that AI can help us to decode animal communication systems. And it was huge in the media, and everyone really was excited. And yeah, within 2 or 3 years, we are capable of understanding and being Dr. Dolittle and really knowing what the animals communicate about and how they encode their information. But AI is not magic. So AI, and we are not there yet, although there are several years past, because AI is not that simple and AI is not magic. And I was also very excited in the beginning, and even today, I'm at least once a month, I get requests from some random computer scientists of all over the world that want to have my data. They want to have my data to do their magic AI. And at the beginning, I provided all my data. I was like, yes, you can have my data, and I never ever have to analyze elephant vocalizations again, which is cool. And yes, do and find out and decode elephant communication. But I ended up being very frustrated because first of all, they then don't come back to you or they don't get any meaningful results. And this was because these computer scientists had not been interested in what I know. They just took the data, didn't ask me questions about the elephants, about how I collected the data, about the metadata that come with these vocalizations. So we did not get any meaningful results. And I thought, no, that has to be better. And luckily, I did get funding for a research project, and now I have my own team. I'm the project coordinator of a highly interdisciplinary team consisting of biologists and computer scientists of different disciplines. And what we do differently, we talk to each other, we communicate to each other, we explain each other what we talk about. I think they understand me. I still don't understand what they tell me. But yeah, I'm doing my best. And that's what it needs. You need to talk to each other. You need to find a common language in order to really use AI meaningful on biological data. And we try to decode elephant communication, which is important because elephant conservation, similar to the conservation of other species, really highlights the need to better understand their biology, their ecology, their cognition, and also their communication to ensure their survival in an increasingly human-dominated environment. And for elephants, besides smell, luckily, sound is the major mode of communication. And now we're going to see if it works. Yes, of course it does. So that was an elephant rumble. That's the most common call type in elephants. It's the vocalization that has infrasonic components, so below the range of human hearing. And what we heard here had been the audible components that are within the human range of hearing. But the most important part of this vocalization are out of our range of human hearing, so we don't perceive this. But elephants use it a lot in various different contexts and also for long-distance communication. They can communicate under, well, atmospheric conditions. It depends, of course, also on the background noise, but up to several kilometers. So they use it extensively. And together with my team, we follow our main research question. Can artificial intelligence help us to decode elephant communication? And our goal is to develop the first dictionary of elephant vocal communication that compiles all identified and experimentally verified acoustic cues together with their potential meaning. And that's a huge endeavor. But we have a big advantage because I know my species, I know my model organism because of my scientific approach that I follow for the last 20 years. And it can be best explained by looking at this evolutionary feedback loop of communication, illustrated here with vocal communication in elephants. But this concept applies to all modalities, with the signaler, the signal, and the receiver playing key roles. In acoustics, sound production mechanisms and internal factors strongly determine the structure of the acoustic output, which encodes, so the acoustic signal encodes a tremendous amount of information accessible, which is accessible to the receiver, who, based on this information, makes functional decisions that drive selection of the signal at the level of its production. So to give you an example, if the signaler produces effective signals, he or she, for example, attractive mating calls, he or she is ultimately more likely to reproduce. So understanding a communication system requires studying all of these aspects. Some are easier studied in ex situ conditions, others really require in situ research. And this is why I combine both approaches, because only together they provide a complete picture. In elephants, our research has advanced knowledge in both settings, offering key insights into their behavior and communication. And this is important for our methodological approach. If you want to use your data in AI, you need a lot of data. And we have about 10,000 annotated calls, which still is not much in machine learning language. But still we have 10,000 elephant vocalizations collected over the last 20 years. And each of these vocalizations you probably don't see that well, but each of these vocalizations is labeled. Each of these vocalizations has an ID, and then we put a lot of metadata to it. Whatever we know, can be the population, can be the family group that we recorded of. The ID, if we know the elephants of ex situ conditions, for example, sex, age, whatever. All the information we have, we enter, and we have a lot of metadata. So we do have the data available, but then we also need knowledge about physiology, sound production, and hearing abilities if you're interested in how elephants perceive sound. So I briefly talk a bit about elephant sound production, and I want to recall how most terrestrial mammals produce their vocalizations for you. We all have vocal folds within our larynx, and they are set into vibrations because of the airflow that comes from our lungs. So it's passive vocal fold vibration. And passive vocal fold vibration means that the size of the vocal folds determine the pitch that I'm vocalizing. So the smaller the vocal folds, the higher the pitch. The larger the vocal folds, the lower the pitch an animal produces. After the larynx, there is the vocal tract, the supralaryngeal vocal tract, which acts like a filter. And source and filter determine the output. So you can imagine the filter like this. If this is the larynx, and then as the source, and then because of the resonances within the vocal tract, certain frequencies are amplified and others are attenuated. The amplified frequency regions are called formants. Formants are very important in human speech, and this energy distribution, which varies a lot, but it carries a lot of information. So if I'm talking to you, I'm articulating, and I'm constantly changing my formants. If I say A, U, E, U, I'm not changing anything at my pitch, I'm just articulating and changing the energy distribution. And also in animals, this energy distribution codes a lot of information. But they don't articulate as much as we do. They, for example, shift between nasal and oral vocal tracts to emit their vocalizations. But how is that working in elephants? So now I'm talking about the low-frequency rumble. And here you have the vocal folds, the vibrating vocal folds of a female elephant. It's not within the elephant, it's an excised larynx, so the elephant died. And we brought the larynx into our excised larynx lab, mimicking the function of the lungs. And the vocal folds have been vibrating passively in exactly the frequency that we also observe in living animals. So it's very likely that elephants apply just the same sound production mechanisms as we humans and most other terrestrial mammals. They are just so low because of their size. These vocal folds are huge. They're like 10 centimeters, mine are like 2 centimeters. And if 10 centimeters, or even in large males, they are bigger. If this mass vibrates, it vibrates at lower frequencies, and therefore they have lower frequency vocalizations. So nothing special here, but what is special in elephants is the vocal tract. Because of the trunk, the nasal vocal tract is strongly elongated compared to the oral one. And if you remember that the vocal tract has a huge impact on the energy distribution of the signal, you will understand that it will make a difference whether the elephant rumbles nasally or orally. But how do you really investigate this? In the trumpet, it's quite clear, but in the rumble, it's not so clear. So we use an acoustic camera array to visualize sound emission. And how is that working? I can briefly explain it here. That's a 48 microphone channel array, and here we even have a 96 microphone channel array. And underneath of each of these bulbs, there is a microphone. And here in the middle, there is a camera. And if that elephant vocalizes, the sound travels and hits each of the microphone at a slightly different time. And the algorithm then calculates the source based on these runtime differences. So what we end up is having this nice videos that's in slow motion. It's the same individual. It's a female vocalizing in two different situations. We don't hear a sound because it's in slow motion, but otherwise it's too fast. And on the left side, the elephant is clearly using or emitting the rumble via the nasal vocal tract, and here it's the oral vocal tract. And even if you're not a bioacoustician and you're not used to read spectrograms, but you can see that there is a huge difference. If elephants use the long nasal vocal tract, they strongly amplify the lower frequency regions. If they use the relatively short oral vocal tract, also higher frequency regions are strongly amplified. And that's a huge difference, and that really codes different type of information. Elephants are very flexible in their vocal system, also how they produce their vocalizations. They can even do it at the same time. They can have a velopharyngeal coupling, so at the same time sound emitting via the nose and the mouth, even making these vocalizations more complex. But for us, it's important to understand why, because we are exposed to this variety of different type of vocalizations and structures, and it helps us to understand why we actually observe that, what is happening. And what's the difference? But elephants produce a variety of different calls. So just for example, Asian elephants also produce high-frequency squeaks. And these high-frequency squeaks are impossible to produce with the vocal cords, because with such large vocal folds, you cannot produce these very high squeaking sounds. And I will play the video to you, and you will hear them, and you will also see how they how they produce it. So usually Asian elephants have air in their cheeks, and then they compress it and they press out the air, and the dense lips are set into vibration, and that's how they produce these squeaking sounds. Okay, so that's impossible to do with such large vocal folds. So yeah, elephants have produced, they are very creative in producing different types of sounds. They also invent sounds, they imitate sounds. So for us, it's important to understand how they produce it. And then it's also important to understand how they perceive the vocalizations. And basically, there is no real paper there. There's just one from the 1980s. But it was time to assess elephant hearing. And I'm not an audiologist, but I integrated audiology via collaboration partners from the US. It's Dr. Peter Schleiferle and his team. And together we conducted brainstem auditory evoked response test to test elephant hearing. It's basically the same test that we do to human infants when we assess how well they hear after birth. So we have an electrophysiological threshold test. We use electrodes. It's like these crocodile electrodes. And here you see one. We use 3 at the forehead, below the ear, and on the side of the body. And we play click sounds and tone bursts via speakers. And then we measure the brain response to determine the hearing abilities. And to give you an idea of the experimental setup, these are well-trained semi-captive elephants in South Africa. And here you see the speaker. It's a small speaker in this case. If we use a subwoofer for playing back low frequencies, so we started to test from 2 Hertz on until 12,000 Hertz, then it's placed on this structure, and it can be positioned so that it fits the size of the elephant. And that's a short video. So could you hear the tone burst? And then what you might have noticed that at some point the elephant closed the ears, and then the handler asked the elephant again to open the ears. That's important because when elephants close their ears, the ear canal is also closed. That's from their aquatic ancestors. So when you want an elephant really to be attentive and hearing very well, they also hear when it's closed. But yeah, it's better if they really open the ear canal. And that also shows us in other experiments that they are really attentive as soon, because when they raise their head and raise their ears, that's when you get an elephant to listen. Okay, so coming back, the domain knowledge, yes. And of course, within the 20 years, although we haven't really decoded elephant communication, particularly how they encode context, but we still know that they do encode a lot of information. So arousal and motivation, for example, and I'm going to do a short test with you. I'm going to play back 2 infant calls. One is more like a protest call, and the other one from the same infant, a distress call. And I'm going to ask you which one you think it is. So first one. And the second one. So who thinks that the second call is more the distress call and not the protest? Yeah, correct. So for us humans, so this call was much more harsh and chaotic, and it's very similar among mammals. So for us, usually it's quite easy to tell how aroused is an animal. Also in elephants, the more aroused and harsh and chaotic the vocalizations get, the more distressed they are. Elephant vocalizations encode sex, individuality, familiarity, so they do have vocal dialects. Maturity, age and size is encoded. Is a huge difference whether the elephant is like that size and 100 kilos or whether you have a 6-ton male. That's a huge difference. And also hormone levels are encoded in their vocalizations. So I'm going to play now a vocalization from an adult male in mast. Mast is a condition in males where the testosterone levels really raise, and that can be for weeks or months. And they advertise this position with a specific, this condition with a specific vocalization. So that's not an engine of a car that doesn't want to start. That's the must rumble of an adult male advertising his condition that he's really ready to fight with everyone. They are very aggressive during that period of time. And basically just want to mate. So we have a lot of domain knowledge, and I'm going to skip this graph, but it just shows that we can also measure long-term stress in acoustic features. Here, just briefly say it. But what's the time? Yeah, I think I have time. We recorded a group of elephants that has been in Kruger National Park translocated from the south, 300 kilometers. I might go back, 300 kilometers up to the north. And they, like elephants, don't like being translocated usually. They really like being in the home range. So they immediately made their way back. And colleagues of us measured the glucocorticoid metabolite levels, and we analyzed the vocalizations that they recorded. And in principle, to make the long story short, this is the fundamental frequency, and this is the hormone levels. And in principle, we could show that as soon as they had been released there, they had been very stressed, and some acoustic parameters had been really raised until after 3 weeks they made their way back, and then they had not been, like the stress levels went down as well as the fundamental frequency went down again. So we can even assess long-term stress based on acoustic parameters. So we have a lot of domain knowledge, and this is important for our AI project because this domain knowledge integrates acoustic models that represent elephant sound production and elephant hearing. And these models now form the foundation for AI algorithms representing sound synthesis, pattern mining, and sound recognition. And at this level, we aim to identify acoustic cues and their role in encoding meaningful information, including contextual information. Because, as I said before, we can basically tell a lot about the sender when we have the vocalization. We can tell it's male, female, whatever the age. But context, we just don't understand how they encode contextual information. To verify our findings, we employ lab-based computational simulations and field experiments. And the field experiments include, again, hearing experiments using mismatch negativity tests. I can explain that later on, and playback experiments. And by more refinement, by iterating between model refinement and empirical validation, we aim to not only understand what elephants communicate, but how they really encode their information. Ultimately, this will enable us to synthesize realistic elephant calls to test high-level acoustic parameters in wild individuals. And yeah, for this, again, we really need to do playback experiments. So I want to show how we actually conduct playback experiments in wild individuals. Because of the infrasound component of the vocalizations, we really need a huge subwoofer. With this subwoofer, it's about 300 kilograms. It's 2 meters in length. We can play back 10 hertz at 110 decibels. So that's really, really loud. And we need that because we have to play back over considerable distances. So we drive around with this custom-made subwoofer in the savannah. And just to give you an example, here several years ago, we tested vocal discrimination abilities of male elephants. And as stimuli, we used female social rumbles, familiar versus unfamiliar ones. So rumbles from females of the same population, while we also used rumbles from females of different parts of Southern Africa that the elephants have not heard before. And then we are measuring listening and attentive reactions as well as orientating responses. So how does this look? Here is a male elephant. The speaker is somewhere on the left. Usually we play it back at like 60 to 100 meter distance because we really have to hide the speaker, which is a challenge with this subwoofer, because the elephants are not allowed to see the speaker. They are not allowed to get the connection between the speaker and the sound. And yeah, I'm going to play that video. So you see that the elephant actually lifts and extends his ears. Now I have to speed up a bit because he is contemplating quite a while. Decides it's interesting, turns to the speaker, trunk high, stop feeding. He wants to get some olfactory information if possible. And then he is now directly facing our speaker. That's how we code the videos. So if I could help us with that, it would be cool as well. Another playback experiment example. So again, ears and head lifted, stops feeding, turns to the speaker, just looks at me and decides, no, I'm not that interesting. And now he is directly approaching the speaker. So elephants are really good in localizing the sound source. And sometimes the males would just really go directly to the car and then pass the car and keep on looking for the very interesting female. And yeah, I'm not really giving you the results, but there is a paper, and in principle, we could show that male elephants are much more interested in vocalizations of unfamiliar females compared to familiar ones. While in females, it's quite the contrary. So if they hear vocalizations that they don't know, they would rather go away. So yes, that's how we conduct our playback experiments. So I'm back with this framework because it's important. Because beyond its application here, it provides a generalizable approach for AI-driven studies on biological data, such as videos, for example. Oops. Here, quite some years ago, we trained an algorithm to detect elephants, not vocalizations, but elephants in various backgrounds and at different distances. So regardless of the data you use, it can be acoustic, vision, GPS data, movement data, whatever, genetic data. You need an extensive amount of data, and it's best that you know about your data, have labeled data. Then you need domain knowledge. So you really need to know your species, and yeah, basically you need to know what you talk about. And you need to implement refinement and verification processes. Give feedback to the system. And if you follow these steps, AI can be a powerful tool for conservation and research as well. But also, decoding elephant communication will have real-life applications. For example, we can establish non-invasive welfare monitoring tools for zoo elephants, monitoring distress, arousal, social interactions, or even estrus detection. And our findings will also help us to improve our intended acoustic early warning and monitoring systems for in situ, which is urgently needed because human-elephant conflict remains a major threat for elephant populations worldwide. And the good thing is, once the system is really established, we can transfer it to other elephant species, and with a bit of more modification, also to other vocally active species as well. But how would that be implemented? already also quite some years ago, Matthias Zeppelzauer and myself developed a prototype for an early monitoring and warning system, and it currently implements acoustic and visual detection to analyze elephant behavior in real time, including, for example, analyzing acoustic attributes for gender or age classification, group size estimation. You can do that with vocalizations or individual detection, and using visual attributes to for activity or motion pattern recognition. The system then provides output at different complexity levels. A simple output shall inform communities or farmers about the presence of nearby elephants. A more sophisticated output shall inform, for example, researchers, conservationists, or zoo management about, whatever they want to know. But there's still a challenge. Currently, we are trying to really improve our detection reliability, which is very difficult because particularly for early warning system, you need to be correct. You cannot do mistakes. So, and that needs a lot of data and a lot of training and adjustment. And we also still need to understand the behavior of elephants better when they approach human settlements. Do they really vocalize or do they shut up? So what modalities do we actually have to use in order to detect them? But once the system is really integrated, it shall enhance and complement existing monitoring techniques. And with this, I'm already done. I want to thank my fantastic team, my collaborators and institutional partners, and thank you for having me here and for your attention. I think we have time for questions. Yes?
Thank you so much. Hello, hello, hello. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Angela, for your presentation. Always exciting to watch. So, first question is from Dr. Markus Klaus.
Thank you. Thank you for the cool presentation. I have a question for a long time. If you would install a microphone at this zoo and a speaker at another zoo, and would you think the animals would choose to make a phone call to each other? And would that in some way be meaningful for them, or would it just be nonsense?
Yeah, that's the idea that many people have. You know, can we use their vocalizations to enrich them? So I think we just would have to find out. I mean, I did start playing back, and not with the huge subwoofer. We just had a smaller one, and elephants in zoos, but they can habituate. So at first they are very confused why we actually hear an elephant. There are no other elephants around, so they start to be confused. But I think that, maybe they would do a phone call, particularly if they know the other individual, so they can recognize each other based on their voice. And we know that even after years, when you give the urine, to other animals, the studies that you showed also with Franziska, that they remember, they keep social, they have a huge social memory. So I'm sure that they will also recognize each other. But of course, I don't know how technologically this would really work, because normal speakers don't reproduce the infrasound. So this is, but maybe, technology increases, so improves. So I don't know, but I never say no.
I would always think that someone like Bang & Olufsen or so would be so happy to sponsor at two zoos. I don't know.
Exactly.
My other question would be, do you think it is a good thing that elephant keepers play didgeridoo for the NFL?
I think that's very much in the range of good hearing. So the paper is not published yet, but elephants have a hearing. It starts at 3 hertz. The best sense of hearing, at least in these African elephant individuals, is around 50 to 100 hertz. So it's in the low frequencies. And I think we can entertain elephants with sounds, because they are, they communicate a lot. They perceive a lot also normally within their environment. They listen a lot, particularly males. They don't vocalize as much as female groups, but they constantly listen. So I'm sure that using acoustics to enrich elephants is useful. And I know from some zoos in the States, which one is it? Is it San Diego? They actually install some speakers where the elephants can go and press, and then they hear some kind of music, then they can decide to go somewhere else, do I listen or not. So I think that's a huge thing we can explore more, how we can actually use their senses, of course smell, but also acoustics to keep them entertained.
Thank you for your presentation. I have two questions about the infrasound. So first of all, is there a sound which is only in the infrasound, which we just cannot hear? You standing in front of elephants and you don't know if they're talking to each other?
In principle, not. So the rumble, if you're close to an elephant, you will hear each vocalization, because the rumble does have upper harmonics in our audible range. But what happens is that as soon as they are further away, if they focus more on the low frequency components, then the higher frequency components are attenuating quite fast, and then just the really low frequency parts travel. So if we are recording in South Africa in the savannah, like many vocalizations we don't perceive, because then we just see them and we don't know who vocalized, because they are from further away, and then the higher frequencies are just attenuated and we just get the low frequencies. So that's where the secret language comes from. But if you are a keeper and if you are close to an elephant, you basically hear all of it.
And you just mentioned that the speakers would not play the infrasound. So how would the elephant react to the sound which is not complete if I do it?
Yeah, I mean, I tried it out and they do still react somehow, but I think it's not, it would be better to have huge speakers. But of course, not everywhere we will play subwoofers. And I just had one experiment where I had a camera team with me at the Vienna Zoo, and of course they wanted the elephants to vocalize, and they didn't. And then I was like, okay, what do I do? And I just had like a small speaker, and I just found the vocalization on my laptop at that time. And that was a call from an individual of the zoo. And I played it back, and the first time there was a soft reaction, and then they said more, and I'm like, okay, so I played it back again. It was just like, they saw the speaker, and it was not like a really experiment. But then they realized that the individual was standing just right next to him, and like this female was looking at the calf at that time, and then it was looking at me, and that was the moment when she realized, come on, you're like fooling me. And she was throwing sand towards us. She never did that before, but she was really, she didn't appreciate that we kind of like really fooled her. And that was, although it was a small speaker, so we really have to find out, what does it need for them to encode their information.
I think we have time for one more question. Are there any online questions? Okay. So Ruth, if you could please bring up the thank you present for Angela. Thank you again once more.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks. Amazing. I might just leave my...
So I think we're just going to take a quick break, and then we will start with the next session. So I think it's 10 minutes. 10-minute break. Okay.
Work right now. So just a small announcement before we start. If anybody had changes on their pickup times for tomorrow, please let us know. And so with this, we will start session 3 with Dr. Elodie. So Dr. Elodie Mandel-Briefer is a behavioral ecologist with over 19 years of experience in animal behavior and in more particularly bioacoustics. She's an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen and the head of the Behavioural Ecological Group, and will give us a talk with the following theme: what can vocalizations tell us about animals?
Can you still hear me well? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, good. Thanks. Thanks for the introduction and for the invitation to speak to this conference. I'm quite sad I couldn't be here in person. I had to run student exam in the past 2 days, which means I also couldn't listen to many of the interesting talks, except Angela's one, the plenary that was being held just before. And I'm very glad that she was talking before me, because many of the things that I won't have time to explain in details, or that I will explain, you've already heard it very clearly from her. So what I thought of doing for this short talk would be to tell you a bit about how can we use vocalizations to infer a lot of things from animals, which Angela also already partly introduced, but how we can use vocalizations basically for both in situ conservation. We want to monitor biodiversity or population size, but also ex situ in the zoos to know about the welfare of the animals and their emotions. So I'm basically giving very similar talk as Angela, but broadening to many more species. So Angela already introduced that. What is communication? It's transmission of a signal that contains some information through a propagation channel, so transmission channel, so the sound will be propagated and then received by a receiver that will decode some of the information. And us, as humans, we can also use these signals to decode the information that is contained and aimed at other receivers in a species. And actually, thanks to the way vocalizations are produced, and because they then differ between individuals, we can infer lots of things from their sounds. So Angela also showed that before. The way we mammals produce sounds, and also birds do that in a very similar way. We basically have air coming from the lungs, and that makes our vocal folds vibrate. That will give us the lowest fundamental, the lowest frequency of the sound, so what we call the fundamental frequency that we perceive as a pitch, so the height of the sound. And then she also showed that elephants produce a very low one. So other mammals will produce higher pitch sounds, and that this will be filtered in the vocal tract. So some frequencies will pass freely, and some will be dampened. So that's what that will give rise to what we call the formants. And so because species differ in the way they produce sounds, individuals as well, and populations, then we actually get a lot of information from the sounds that we can kind of gather in several main categories. The first one would be the identity of the individual that is fixed over the time. So the species, the population this individual is from, because very often population will differ in their genetics or size, body size. Males and females will speak differently, will vocalize differently. Individuals also very often. Then we can have information about the characteristics, so the body size, the age of the individual. Often also the dominance rank, because vocalizations are quite often honest information, honest signals of the dominance rank of the animals. Importantly for ex situ conservation, the physical health, so the health of the animal and the mental states. And then finally, sometimes also the behavioral context, so more generally in which context the animal is, and even relationship quality between individuals. And in some species, external events like presence of predator. So in the rest of this talk, I will go over each of these categories and give you some examples from work conducted in my team. So let's start with the individual identity. We studied that in goats. So we can study differences between populations, but also sometimes there are differences between social groups. So here we had the chance to have half-sibling goat kids raised either one. This is how we recorded them. To be separated from the mother. And so we recorded them at 1 and 5 weeks old. And then we checked if it made a difference whether they were raised in the same group or in a different group. So we basically extracted all kinds of parameters from the sounds, and then we look at the similarities in the sounds at 1 week and 5 weeks. And what we found out is that quite surprisingly for a mammal that doesn't have much control over the vocalizations, at 5 weeks, goat kids raised in the same group actually sound more similar than goat kids raised in different groups. And they all have siblings, so all share the same level of genetic relatedness. And to illustrate that, I will play the sounds of 2 goat kids from one group, and then 2 goat kids of another group, and 2 goat kids of a third group. So let's see if you hear the difference. Sorry, I hope you can hear the sounds. So we basically have here, through maybe vocal convergence or some other kinds of matching of emotions, so we end up having a signature of the group. And then, of course, we also have a very strong signature of the genetic relatedness, so kin. So we also found out that full sibling at 5 weeks, they sound much more similar than half sibling. So through the sounds, we can also know who's related to who genetically. And since, as we do, many species also, in many species, individuals also sound different, then we can also get information about the individual identity of the animals. So that will differ a lot between species and also sometimes between types of sounds. And the way we usually look at that is to measure all kinds of parameters from the sounds and then plot these in a two-dimensional space, like you can see on the top here, top left. So where each dot corresponds to a call, then each shape to an individual. And so if you have individuals that sound very different, so you'll have very little within individual variation and very big among individual variation. And if that's the case, then you will be able to tell who is who based on the sounds. In some other species or call types, then it's much less, you have much more overlap, so it becomes more difficult. And usually when we do comparisons, so we look at how many of these dots basically were correctly classified, so classified to the right individual in some kind of percentage. So that's what we did on goats, for example, when they were 1 week old and then 5 weeks old and then in adults. And what we can see is with age, basically this percentage of correct classification increases from 50 to almost 70%. So in adults, the calls are much more stable. So there is much more individuality in adults than in younger individuals. And then that, of course, also differs between call types sometimes. So my former PhD student, Bing, she looked at zebras, plain zebras. She looked at their snorts, which are not necessarily for communication purpose, but that they produce a lot, and then squeals. And then she found out that there is actually quite low individuality in both calls, but in snorts, it's higher than chants, while in squeals, it's not. So there is individuality in snorts, but not squeals. I had another student, Anna, who looked at little auks and then compared individuality between all kinds of sounds that they produce. And as you can see, there's a lot of variation. So going from 20% correct classification in their short trills to up to 40% in the short calls. So you might also end up having some calls that encode individuality more than others. So now we can move on to the physical characteristics, so body size and age and dominance. And we studied that in fallow deer. So you can see how the video works, how they produce sounds. So they lower the larynx a lot. You can even see it moving when they vocalize to extend their vocal tract. And this extension of vocal tract basically will lower the formants that you can see here with these dark shapes. So what ends up eventually is that the maximum at which they can lower the vocal tract, so these lower points in the formants actually reflects their body size. So we know that it reflects the body size and also their dominance rank each year. And what we were interested in this project is to see how that evolves over time, because males before 5 years old, they're actually quite low ranking. Between 5 and 7, they can be very high ranking. And then when they're old, they drop in rank again. So we're wondering if this is a honest information over time. So do the grounds also change over time with the rank of the individual? And we found out that it was the case. So when there are, for example, high-ranking 6-year-old, sound like this. And then at 7, so a bit lower ranked. And then at 8, even lower ranked. So it's quite hard to hear, but you can see with the arrows that actually the formants go up with time. So basically males that are older, they will produce lower formants and lower frequency. Higher formants and higher frequencies. So they will increase their pitch. And less dominant males, they also have a higher formants, a higher fundamental frequency than more dominant males. And interestingly, these changes to their sounds are so strong that from 1 year to the next, we cannot recognize the same individuals or barely. So they really change their sounds from one rut to the next season. In goats, in many other species, you can also get then, as in the fallow deer, very clear information about their age, especially when they grow up. Because obviously when they grow up, they will start having larger lungs and longer vocal folds and longer vocal tract. And that very logically means longer durations of sounds, as you can see in the last picture here, last spectrogram, and lower frequencies and formants. And I'm going to play them so that you can hear how the same goat changes from 1 day to 104 days. So through the calls, we can then get information about their age. And more importantly, for ex situ, as I mentioned before, so you can also get information about their emotions, which is my main line of research. So if we come back to the Saltfisher theory of speech production, so I explain how we produce sounds, and then quite logically, actually, when we have an emotion, so we might be more tense, our respiration will increase, salivation will decrease, articulation might change, and all of this will affect our voice. And it's the same with animals. They cannot articulate as much as us, except some species, like elephants, obviously, and also parakeets and other species. But the others can also open their mouths and close their mouths. That will also change the formants. And we expect even more direct relationship, especially in the species that don't have so much control over their sounds, which could be, for example, most of the ungulates I've been studying. So the way we study emotions, we basically place the animals or observe the animals in very clear, emotionally positive situations like food interaction, food reward, or positive interactions. We compare that to negative, emotionally negative states, such as isolation. We observe them having negative when they have agonistic interactions. When we can, we put a heart rate monitor on to look at heart rate, or respiration rate, etc. We can also look at the behavior if we cannot feed a heart rate. That will basically tell us what's the intensity of the emotions, so the arousal that Angela also already talked about. And then we can record the sounds, and we can see if the sounds are affected by the intensity, so the arousal or the valence. Does it differ between positive and negative states? And just to jump to the results, because I don't have too much time, but basically over all the species I've been looking at, we see a common trend for some parameters to change between negative and positive states. So usually in negative situations, they tend to have much longer duration sounds, not all of them, but many, compared to the positive states. So in positive situations, they become shorter, lower, and less variable in frequencies. And thanks to these parameters that are quite similar across species, we can actually train an AI. That's what my former PhD student Romain did, to train an AI to differentiate between these valence, so whether the calls are positive or negative across all species. And even when being fed with all the species you see at the bottom here, lots of ungulates, we get 90% accuracy. So we could have some kind of universal translator, ideally, if we feed it with many species. And so the last thing I wanted to talk about is the context, because calls also differ between general contexts, and it also indicates sometimes quality of the relationship between individuals. And so that's what, again, a former PhD student, Isabel, has been looking at in meerkats. So meerkats produce these close calls very often when they forage. We have one more here. So they're basically contact calls that they produce all the time when they forage to keep track of each other. That was in the Kalahari meerkat station, where they can follow them very close by. And she looked at the structure of this contact call, of these close calls, and how they differ when the individual is scrabbling, digging, eating, foraging, moving, post-vigilant. And as you can see, there is actually quite a lot of differences in these calls, depending on the context, especially in their fundamental frequency and the range. So basically their pitch changes quite a bit. And the last thing I wanted to show is the relationship quality. So here, that was, again, my PhD student Bink, who looked at zebras, and she was interested in the function of their squeals, which you will hear now. Just now, it's quite low volume, so I don't know if you heard it, but she was interested in why do they produce these sounds. It's actually very low amplitude sound, so close range communication. And to do that, she looked at the squeal network, so who interacts with who, who squeals to who, and then tried to see if this match other networks, such as who answers to who, or who has the negative interactions to who. And she found that the squeal networks mostly matches the agonistic response. So pairs with more agonistic interactions were producing more squeals, which means squeals likely indicates an slightly agonistic response. So just to conclude, so vocalizations can tell us a lot, as I showed you. So from who's from which population, social group, family group, individual, who's the age of the individual, sometimes their dominant rank, their emotions, and also sometimes behavioral context and social relationship quality. And as Angela nicely illustrated, nowadays, actually with AI, you can have monitoring systems that could help for the conservation. So for example, population monitoring, but also in zoos to assess the emotion or the welfare. So in farms or zoos, which is what we did in the Sunwell project on pigs. So we managed to train an AI with 92% accuracy to tell us if the calls of the pigs were positive or negative. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much, Dr. Elodie. We have time for one question, quick question.
Stop sharing so I can see people.
Okay, so there are online questions? No. Okay, so then we will move on for the next speaker, Katharina Prager. So Katharina is a PhD student at the Acoustic Research Institute of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, investigating the adaptive function of the cheetah contact chirp. Her research focus lies on the bioacoustics/cognitive biology in mammals, and she will give us a talk with the following theme: bird or cheetah, utilizing playbacks to test prey species reaction to cheetah chirps.
I'm just also going to start my timer. Is it fine if I speak here? Yeah, perfect. Okay, hi everybody. I'm super glad to be here. And we just heard a lovely talk about vocalizations in general. And I'm going to speak about one very specific and I think quite curious vocalization, which is the cheetah contact chirp. And the presentation is called Bird or Cheetah and is about how we utilize playback experiments to test prey species reaction to cheetah chirps. It's a bit quiet. Can we turn up the volume? We hear a very quiet meow. Okay, I think I can continue so long. What you heard was in fact not a domestic cat, but a cheetah, because they make a variety of sounds. And I think you're all familiar with what a cheetah is, but just as a quick summary, it is the fastest living terrestrial mammal, but it's also remarkable in other ways. So cheetahs are semi-social cats in the way that males often form permanent collisions. So they will stay together with brothers or also sometimes unrelated males, whereas females are mostly solitary, but when they have offspring, these will also stay with them, of course, for about 1.5 years. Then they're listed by the IUCN as vulnerable. This is mostly due to habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict, and of course illegal trade, as is the case for many of the large predators. And they are highly specialized hunters, so they are built for speed very much and not so much for strength, which is also one of the reasons why there is a very high mortality rate, especially in juvenile cheetahs, because they're less strong than other predators such as lions and hyenas and will often get killed by them. And of course, as carnivores, there's a necessity to regularly capture prey in order to survive. A little bit more about the theoretical background, because I think all these texts you might have known about cheetahs, but what you may not have known before is that they produce a variety of vocalizations. These include the meow that we just heard very quietly, also purring, they can purr very nicely, and what is most interesting to us, the so-called contact chirp. And the contact chirp is a very high-pitched vocalization that is used for long-distance communication between affiliated individuals. So brothers of a collision will use it, and also mothers with their offspring. We already know that it encodes sex and age, but to some extent also individuality. And what is interesting about it is that it is very untypically high in frequency for an animal that is like this big. So as we heard earlier, larger animals have the tendency to produce lower sounds, smaller ones higher pitched sounds, but the cheetah produces a very high pitched sound for its size. And also it is very high pitched for a sound used in long distance communications, because typically low sounds travel further. Nevertheless, the cheetah uses a very high pitched sound for long distance communication. And it resembles a bird chirp very much, and this is why the hypothesis has been out there that maybe the cheetah chirp evolved this way to resemble bird chirps, so it is less conspicuous and less detectable for predators or maybe even prey species in the African savanna. So we can imagine it a bit like this. A cheetah chirps, and now we should hopefully hear it. That was a cheetah chirp. And somewhere nearby, maybe there's an antelope or also a lion, hears this without seeing the cheetah and thinks, oh, this is a bird, obviously, because it sounds very much like a bird. And just as a comparison, here is a video of an actual bird. That is a black-headed oriole, and I think we can agree that it sounds quite similar. And we therefore wanted to know if prey species can actually recognize what is a cheetah and what is a bird. And also if they can differentiate between chirps from adult males and chirps from infants or sub-adults. And we are testing this by using playback experiments. I want to tell you a little bit about why playback experiments are super cool and super interesting. So they are a highly valuable tool to test sort of animals in their natural environments in their own language, kind of, because we can play back their own or the sounds of other species and really test wild animals. However, that of course comes with certain challenges. So there's a few things you really need to keep in mind if you want to do a good playback study. One of the most important ones is to have good stimuli that you're playing back. That means you need to have a high recording quality, a variety of sounds as well, because these are the most common mistakes to make. I cannot just go on the internet and download some MP3 file and think if I play it back to an animal, it will sound naturalistic. And this is, I think, also where zoos can be super handy or super good cooperation partners to provide the opportunity to record these sounds in the first place in a high quality. We need to be aware of pseudo-replication. So basically, if I record one sound and then go play it back to 10 animals, I will not have 10 data points, I will have one, because I'm only testing the reaction to this one specific sound rather than a category of sounds. So I need to have a variety of playback stimuli. And of course, I need to keep in mind when I play back these stimuli, because if I want to, for example, look at movement responses, I cannot play back while the animal is already moving, because then I will not see any differences in response. And habituation is another issue. So if I want to test an animal, I will have to have quite a few days at least elapse between different sessions, because otherwise they will just habituate and realize this sound is not relevant for me anymore. What did we do? So in the first phase of our study, we tested prey species, which we did at the Mabulla Game Reserve in Africa. We tested 4 different ones. We tested kudu, impala, zebra, and wildebeest with cheetah chirps, other cheetah sounds, other predator sounds from lions and white dogs, and as a control, of course, bird sounds. How did we do that? We had 2 cars, one with a loudspeaker and one with a camera. The loudspeaker car, we always try to hide behind available vegetation, because these species tend to have good directional hearing, and if you just put a car there and play a sound, they will realize it's coming from the car. And then we had a second car with a camera that recorded the reaction. And in reality, this looked something like this. Oh no, yeah, this is what we would do. We would play back and then record. It looked something like this in reality. And I'm going to show you a quick video of one of the experiments. Here we played back a cheetah chirp. So I'm now recording baseline. Now there's the stimulus playing. You can see one of the wildebeest is reacting. The car that's playing the stimulus is parked to the left. So now he's looking towards the car. Now he's looking again towards the camera car, maybe a bit confused. And you will see that he's gonna go back to grazing quite fast, whereas the other one did not really react at all, so it seems he didn't care. And yeah, that was the reaction to a male chirp that we played back in this case. And as a comparison, here's a reaction to a lion playback. In this case, the camera car is parked on the right side of the screen. And apparently a decision has been made to better move away. And what you can see also is that the reaction differs a bit. So not all the animals react the same. We think that maybe the one that is still standing and watching was like the leading female, making sure that everybody else is going, and she was kind of waiting and checking. And now she's also moving away. Yeah, so that was a bit of a comparison between two different stimuli categories. It's an ongoing study, so we only have some first results. We conducted over 100 playback experiments using 4 different categories: the cheetah chirps, other cheetah calls, other predator calls, and bird calls. Here you can see an overview of how many we did. So the category 1 is different variations of cheetah chirps, 2 is other cheetah calls, 3A is lions, 3B is wild dogs, and 4 is birds. And I haven't done the analysis yet, but what I can already tell you from, well, just doing the experiments is that they did react to cheetah chirps, but I think that it was varied, so that they reacted more strongly to male chirps than they did to infant chirps or sub-adult chirps. So there might be a difference there, but we will have to look, of course, at the statistics. And if we find this difference, there's also different ways to interpret it. So it could be because the male chirps are more relevant to them, or it could be because the infant chirps really sound like birds, like I couldn't tell the difference. So maybe the prey species cannot tell it as well, but we will have to look at our final results then. How did we do the video coding? So we recorded videos, which we coded in the Boris software. I think many of you will be familiar with this, and I actually think we will have a talk on that software. We coded up to 2 individuals. So before we started recording, I picked one, or if I managed to get them in the frame, 2 individuals. And these were also the ones that we coded, provided they stayed in frame, because it's sometimes not so easy to capture them. But when possible, we always code 2 individuals that were, as far as possible, randomly selected. So if I had 5 in the frame, I would number them and then randomly select 2. We always have a 30-second baseline, and what we code are orientation and movement responses, similar to what Angela showed us in the earlier presentation. So basically turning towards the speaker, moving away or towards. And as far as possible, we blind coded this. In this case, this basically just means we put a label when the stimulus was playing on the same day that we recorded the data, and later back home, when we analyzed it, we just muted the video, so I cannot hear which category was actually played. And of course, we're going to do some double coding to check that it's actually valid. And the next steps will be double coding the videos and doing the statistical analysis, as well as experiments with lions, which will hopefully be done next year, and I think might be even more interesting than the prey species, because I expect it to be a stronger adaptive factor, because if they are recognized by lions, the lions will most likely kill them. And yeah, I hope you stay tuned for more, and I'm very happy to take questions. And of course, a huge thank you to all our collaborators, the zoos and the Mabula Game Reserve, and everybody in the lab. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Hi, Katharina. Thanks so much for your presentation. I have a few questions, actually. The first one is, have you compared the sound of the cheetah to determine if it's a mimic from a particular bird species?
So we don't think it's a particular bird species because it's a sound that the cheetahs do everywhere, and also felids are not known as vocal learners, so it's unlikely that they learn new vocal signals. But it is a sound, a bird, like there's a couple of bird species in Southern Africa that produce sounds that sound super similar. And also when you look at the spectrogram, you can kind of see that it also looks super similar. So we think if it's an adaptation in that way, it's more a generalized blending in with background sounds rather than one specific bird species.
Okay, yeah, because then my second question was if you thought the chirp was location dependent. So where in South Africa, maybe it's kind of similar to the birds there, but in Germany, it's completely different for the ones held in zoos, for example?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I would not think so, but there haven't been many studies done on that as far as I'm aware. But as it's, yeah, there might be, I think there might be local differences in populations, as might always be the case in vocal signals, but I don't think there's a very strong learned component because it's just very unlikely in felids that are not vocal production learners. But of course, without doing studies, I cannot fully exclude that there's some sort of dialect, but I wouldn't think it's likely.
So are there any more questions? Okay, thank you very much, Katharina. So with this, we finish session 3.